each man who got rich by mining, perceiving that hundreds grew poor, I made up my mind to try farming, the only pursuit that was sure.
When Richard Little arrived in Colorado in 1860, many disappointed miners had already gone home. But some settled on the rich farmland of the South Platte River Valley. Little's surveying skills were valuable. He laid out farms and ranches and water canals. One of his jobs was to survey a ditch that started about 5 blocks south of what is now Bowles Avenue. The ditch ran north along the Platte River to the booming new town of Denver. Little tramped the land along the river. Like thousands of people who would come after him, he must own that this valley was home. Near what is now Arapahoe Community College, Richard Little changed careers and began a new dream, Littleton. After laying out the ditch for the Capital Hydraulic Company, Little worked 2 more years as a surveyor, and then he filed a homestead claim on 160 acres of farmland on the higher ground just east of the river. Little didn't pick the site by accident. The soil along the river was rich and deep, as Horace Greeley had noted during a visit in 1859. The river provided ample water for irrigated crops. Fruit trees grew well. Wheat and barley thrived in spite of the limited rainfall. Little built a log cabin near the river. No trace of that cabin exists now, but it was probably a comfortable home for its day. After all, Little was a civil engineer. He knew a thing or two about beams and corners and bearing walls. His home was ready. Little returned to Chicago and brought his wife, Angelina, west to join him. Richard Little built his cabin in 1862. Colorado was still a territory, only a year old. The land was still wide open, and one cabin did not make a town. But a few more families settled along the river, and soon the cluster of cabins had become a small, prosperous farming settlement. When A.D. Richardson visited Denver in 1859, he wrote a paragraph that describes very well what was happening in Littleton and throughout the West.
Making governments and building towns are the natural employments of the migratory Yankee. He takes to them as instinctively as a young duck to water. Congregate 100 Americans anywhere beyond the settlements, and they immediately lay out a city, frame a state constitution, and apply for admission into the Union, while 25 of them become candidates for the United States Senate.
In Littleton, the base of the new community was farming. Farms in the valley and on the surrounding land grew excellent wheat, but their only market was in Denver. Most flour was shipped in from the east by freight wagon. It was expensive. In 1867, Little and other local men asked, why not build a flour mill right here in Littleton? The idea made sense. Other farmers put money into the project. The mill was built next to the river, near what is now the corner of Santa Fe and Bowles. The flour mill changed Littleton forever. That first mill was made of wood. The ditch that Richard Little had surveyed 7 years earlier provided plenty of water to drive the mill. Ox wagons hauled the millstones from St. Louis to Littleton. First mill burned to the ground a short time later. So did its replacement. But the disasters could not stop a good idea. The mill was built up again. This time, they used stone. The rough and ready flour mill became the most active mill within 200 miles. It brought workers, a regular payroll, and a steady economy to the valley. Suddenly, Littleton was a town.
My dear sister, if you were here, you could hardly believe the changes in our little village. We arrived just 3 years ago, in 1869. That was the same year they built the big hotel overlooking the river. Last year, the railroad reached Littleton on the way to Colorado Springs. Now, Mr. Little has divided up his farm, and he's selling lots for homes and businesses. Mr. J.D. Hill has just built a general store across from the hotel. Not so long ago, we still saw Indians coming around. We also have our first church. The Episcopalians built it on the road to Colorado Springs. It has a fine spire and is quite dignified.
A newspaper editor named W.B. Vickers made a remarkable forecast a few years later in 1888. He wrote,
Although Denver stands in no immediate need of a suburb to live in, the time will come, no doubt, when Littleton's wealth and population will be swelled by the overflow of Denver. No more charming country village can be found in Colorado than cozy Littleton. It is nestled in a grove of trees like any old New England village.
Richard Little must have smiled and thought of his hometown of Nashua, New Hampshire, when he read that. Gradually, during the 1880s, Littleton began to grow east and north. That's when Main Street really began to develop. This depot was built in 1884, almost 100 years ago. By then, Littleton was quite a town. These railroad tracks marked the east edge of the village, and 4 blocks away, the river and the mill marked the west edge. Between them was Main Street. The street ran down to the mill. It ran up the hill past the stone depot and across the railroad track. The dirt road continued through the orchards, the gardens, and on into the wheat field and plains that stretched out to Kansas. But the heart, the place where things happened, was only 4 blocks long. It still is.
My recollection is that the Car and Tinkle Meat Market was, in a way, social center, very much like for the men at Pool Hall or the post office. People would meet there, maybe the only encounter they would have for a week or a month. On the side for the meat market and the drugstore, every day, particularly on Saturday, would be the row of wagons. Now, I can't remember how many. There were a few buggies, but most of them were wagons would also carry seed and hay and straw. And usually there the children rode in on the back with their feet hanging over, and they all were rounded up after all the business of the morning or afternoon was taken care of.
Ray Worley lived in Littleton when he was a child. His father was a blacksmith.
It was absolutely a farm town at that time. It depended very near all on the farmers in the surrounding country. They raised wheat and corn and all that sort of stuff, hay and grain. I thought it was a beautiful place. Littleton was a wonderful place to live. A nice town, farm town, you know. And I really liked it.
1888, Littleton had a newspaper, the Littleton Gazette, today's Littleton Independent. More churches were built. Along with church came that other institution of frontier life, the saloon. By 1889, commuters could ride to Denver on Uncle Sam. The little train ran back and forth to Denver 7 times a day. Don't you wish we had that kind of train service day? Richard Little died just before the turn of the century in this stone house. By then, his little town was a boom success, with a population of 738 souls. There was a lumber company, blacksmith shops, grocery stores, meat markets, barber shops, a city water system, volunteer fire department, and fraternal lodges. Main Street was a lively place. Richard Little was buried on the hill above his town in the river valley. When he died, the Littleton Independent wrote, "The story of Littleton is his story." Here's something else that was in his obituary. The beautiful village of Littleton now stands as a lasting monument to his untiring perseverance and progressiveness. Richard Little's death marked the end of a dramatic childhood for his town. But this was only the beginning for Littleton. In later programs, we'll look at how his town changed and grew during the next 80 years. We hope you'll join us.